Hi there, I'm Jamie Taylor. Welcome to Your Health Matters, brought to you by Kingman Regional Medical Center, your community-owned hospital. If you've watched this show before, then you know that every week I have a different guest on the program, and we talk about different programs, services, healthcare issues that I think will be relevant and important to you and your family. So I hope you'll stay tuned. We'll be back right after these messages. I have a great guest on the program today. Welcome back to Your Health Matters. My guest today is Stephen Poe, who's a clinical dietitian here at KRMC. Thanks for being on the show today, Steve.
Oh, thank you for having me, Jamie.
Appreciate you filling in last minute too, because I had to call you and go, help, because the bug's going around town right now and people are getting sick. Anyway, so you're a clinical dietitian, so you're helping us stay healthy, right?
Yes, from a nutrition standpoint.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you actually go on the floor and see patients?
Yeah, the most of what I do each day is I actually work with the patients one-on-one, and I get to look over their medical history, and then I get to make recommendations to the patient and to the doctor for appropriate interventions, diets, tips for success from a nutrition standpoint.
Okay, and do you find that there's a lot of things that maybe that can improve by a patient changing their diet?
Absolutely, yeah. Sometimes we have patients in the hospital who are sick, so a lot of times what I deal with is patients who actually are very ill and aren't eating. So a little different than sometimes the general population where maybe they're overeating. In the hospital a lot of times I'm dealing with patients who are very sick a lot of times. But I still get plenty of opportunities to help other people with tips of general nutrition though.
Okay, so then also you helping them find, like if they are so sick you're talking about and they're not eating much and then they're getting ready to go home, so do you give them recommendations on what they're going to eat when they do get home? Yeah,
some patients who maybe they have certain illnesses that have affected their appetite, and so they're not eating enough and they've had a lot of weight loss, either from cancer or different illnesses that would affect that. We give them tips how to get more calories, actually to gain weight.
And then I've never had that problem, but maybe someday. No.
Well, but then there's plenty of patients who are in the hospital and they find out for the first time they're diabetic, and they need to learn what to do. And we work with those patients, teach them about how nutrition plays a role in that, and work with them, and also teach them tips on weight loss. And
that's really good. And I think a lot of times people just don't think about what they're putting into their mouth and how that's impacting them. So how do you become a dietitian? Where did that start for you?
Great question. For me, I've always loved food. I always have. I've just always had a good appetite and a strong love for food. And so when I went to school, I heard about this dietetics field. It was a strange word. I didn't really know what it meant, but people actually recommended it to me. So I looked into it. And I found that there was this career where I could work with food and specifically people and help them learn about it. But I still wasn't sure. So anyway, I kind of jumped into this program and I learned very quick what it was about, and I loved it. Cool. But what it requires is a bachelor's degree and a year-long internship after you graduate.
So it's not just book learning. You have to kind of actually have some experience in it too.
Yeah, you have to have about 1,000 to 1,200 hours of hands-on experience after you graduate through an internship, and then you have to take a national board exam to make sure that you're competent. Not just have you gone through the experience, but do you understand and that you're actually, the recommendations you're making to patients are safe, because you can do damage if you make recommendations that aren't.
And that's long-term effects, and that can really impact a patient's health, both now and later. So there's obviously a lot of different specialties. Before the show we were talking about the different clinical dietitians we have here at KRMC, and they're we have, what did you say, 3 that are on the floor like yourself?
We have 3 full-time dietitians who work for inpatients inside the hospital. Okay,
and then there's others as well. What was that you were telling me about?
So we have 2 other dietitians who do outpatient. One of them specializes is specialized in oncology for patients with cancer. Okay. And she's at the Cancer Center. And we have another one. She is outpatient. She does outpatient and general across the board outpatient, anything from diabetes, weight loss, everything like that. But she also specializes in diabetes. Okay. And so that's her specialty, and they're both great.
Well, and for you though, I'm thinking yours because you see all the, or can see anybody in the hospital, so you have to have a broader range of knowledge almost than if you specialize, right?
To some degree, yeah. I'm kind of the jack of all trades a little bit. I have so much of experience in all of them, and that's true for most clinical dietitians, that they have good experience in all of them, and they can be competent. I haven't specialized so much to have one area where I'm really specialized in. I really find it interesting. I like the patients, or I like the aspect of my job where I do nutrition support. And that's a term basically used for patients who need tube feeding or nutrition through their veins.
Oh, okay.
So, and it makes me feel very useful in a situation like that, because that's where my specialty really shines, even though I'm not specialized in it, but I really enjoy doing that. I feel like I'm making a difference in the patients' lives.
So what kind of things are you able to do for patients that have to eat through a tube or an IV? What do you give them?
Well, they're specialized formulas.
Okay.
We have to make sure they get, with this, we have to make sure they meet their calorie and their protein needs, and also we have to teach them how much fluid that they need, like extra water. Because they can't swallow so much, they have to know what to do. And sometimes these patients can do this for themselves, or the family may need trained on how much.
So you have to do quite a bit of work, I would guess, with the family as well,
Yes.
helping them understand what's going on. So now the tube that you're talking about, is that usually through the stomach, that goes directly to the stomach, that you're putting the nutrition in?
That's a great question. So often it is. If a patient leaves the hospital, often it goes through the wall of the stomach. But in the hospital, we temporarily will place tubes that go up through the nose, and then it goes down into the stomach. And that's a temporary process that we can do for them, and we can feed them that way too. So when they don't need it anymore, they could just take that tube and pull it back out of their nose, and it's not as invasive.
Okay, so obviously it has to be pretty thin, because those are real big tubes that are going. And so how do you, so I'm trying to visualize here, is that like really thick pea soup, or what do you?
So what we're putting through the formula is, you could imagine kind of like, have you ever heard of Ensure, over the counter, that you can buy it in the stores and stuff? Very similar to that, and we use products like that. It's liquid. There's no chunks or anything in it. It's just liquid formula, and it has everything a patient needs.
All their vitamins plus the high proteins you were talking about, and
then we monitor the patient. We follow up with them and make sure it's adequate. Where if they were losing weight or we saw concerns in their blood work, we could increase it or decrease it depending on what we felt.
And then, is there follow-up? Because when you leave, and you have this diet that you're supposed to be following, whether it's liquid or a bland diet, right? Things like that. Then what about when they get home? If they have questions, what do they do?
So patients, if they leave the hospital, they are able to call us if they have questions, but we recommend, if it's a temporary thing, that they follow up with their primary care provider.
They go back.
Yeah, and that they go with them. Since we specifically work with patients, my thing is with inpatients in a hospital, I'm not able to assess them in the way that I was while they were a patient in the hospital. So it's best if they follow up once they leave with their primary care.
I wasn't sure if we had any kind of a follow-up program that we worked with them when they left.
If they're a new diabetic, we do have that.
Then they can go with Jennifer at the...
Yep, we have a diabetic program.
Great. So I remember when my grandfather was first diagnosed with diabetes, and he got this huge long list of everything he couldn't eat. And my mom said, well, let's focus on what you can eat and trying to take it from a more positive side of it. And I think nowadays we focus on that more, right? Helping educate what you can eat.
That's a very good principle when it comes to education. Patients, they feel a little overwhelmed with what's going on, and it's good to focus on what you can do. And we do try to do that. I know myself and other dietitians, when we come and we say, this is what we would encourage you to do, instead of just telling them, kind of smacking their hand and saying, don't do this, don't do that.
That's the hard part, when you've got a health issue and you have to totally change habits that you've had for a lifetime.
It's true.
Relearning how to do them again. So do you find most patients, though, when they're here in the hospital, at least they're willing or wanting to follow those guidelines?
We have many patients who do. The patients are wonderful. But there's a lot of things going on in a patient's life and what's brought them to the situation where they're at. And I think understanding their individual situation, what their home life is like, what support they have at home, you have to kind of tailor your recommendations to them and talk to them what's realistic for them. And what can
I'm
change.
glad to hear that, Stephen, because it is the whole person, obviously, and like we talked about before, the family as well. What kind of a family support they have? Are they living alone? Do they know how to cook? Can they do their own grocery shopping? So you kind of look into that whole
a patient
picture.
A patient who comes from a nursing home isn't going to be preparing their meals when they return to the nursing home.
Right.
So when you talk to them, it may be as simple as don't add salt to the food when you bring it out to you, as opposed to teaching them cooking skills, since they won't be doing that.
Sure. Okay, that makes sense. And then, and then maybe looking at other spices if you are cooking it at home. Besides salt, if there's other things we can do to add flavor to our foods, right?
Absolutely.
So those are the kind of things you learned about in school.
Yeah. And when it's appropriate and when it's not, to have things and teaching patients, we learn a lot of scientific stuff. We have a science degree. How do you make that simple for somebody to understand when what's realistic for them when they leave? You tell them to eat a low diet, low in salt.
Yeah, what does that mean?
Yeah, what does that really mean and how do you do it? And so we try to keep it very basic and teach them when you read a label, how do you do that? What are you looking for?
I was just going to ask you about that, if you work on them with helping them look at the labels on their prepared and packaged foods, because there's a lot of hidden things there too, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And especially our processed foods that we all are so used to nowadays, and there's a lot of that salt and preservatives that aren't going to help their diet too much. So those are good things. Now, so do you like to cook as well?
I love to cook.
Okay, so that's kind of is that where your interest in food? You like to cook and then learn more about it?
Yeah, I don't know which one came first, but I love to cook. My wife and I are just, we rarely eat out. We love to cook so much. And
that's great.
We're comfortable. I mean, we think our food's so good. We
couldn't do any better, right?
Well,
So does she like to cook too?
She does, very
so
much
you
so.
partner in the kitchen. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
That's a great thing. Now see, my husband is a cook in our family. He's a great cook, not so much me. And so I do the cleaning, he does the cooking. We have a good relationship that way. But it's great when the two of you. Now, did you meet your wife in college?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, and that was, I know we talked before the show, but let's share with the audience where you got your education.
So I went to Utah State University, which is in Logan, Utah. That's the Aggies, the school.
Yeah.
And I absolutely loved it, and I had a great experience. My wife was going to school. She actually, ironically, has a degree in exercise science, and I have a degree in nutrition, and people get a good laugh out of that.
Yeah, that's a good partnership, isn't it? You can eat too much and you can exercise.
Yeah, I mean, we really do complement each other well in so many ways.
Yeah.
And then I went on and got my master's through the same university while I was working at KRMC.
Okay, so you came right from school to KRMC, were your first on the job?
Yes, so after I graduated, this was my first job. And I had never heard of Kingman, Arizona. No. I applied because
you saw it online, or how did you find it?
I found it online, through a job search engine. And I applied, and they called me, and next thing you know, I was in Kingman.
Well, so we're a little warmer than Logan, Utah. We still have our winters, though, and it's not quite so bad. Yeah, you can go up to the Wallapies if you start having withdrawals. Not this year so much, though. We haven't even got snow up in the Wallapies this year. Of course, I shouldn't say that. It's still early in the winter. Could happen yet, but it's a good place to, I consider my idea of a perfect winter where you can drive up to the snow and then drive back out.
I agree. Yeah. It's a welcome change.
Yes. Okay, well, we're going to talk more after this break. We'll be back. So stay tuned. We'll be back right after these messages. Welcome back to Your Health Matters. My guest today is Stephen Poe, who's a clinical dietitian here at KRMC. Thanks again for being on the show, Stephen. Now, we were talking before the show about the different things that a dietitian does, but I'm going to pretend like I'm a patient, okay, and I've just come into KRMC, and then, so at what point, I've been admitted through the ER, what point, where do you meet me?
That's okay, great question. So as a dietitian, I need to prioritize which patients I see.
Sure.
So part of my initial, what I do initially each day is I go through the patients in the hospital and I screen them. And I look for things that stand out, that would put you at maybe a nutrition risk.
Okay.
Maybe being malnourished, maybe uncontrolled diabetes, maybe, having high cholesterol, or something that jumps out at us.
Okay.
Or, maybe your weight's very low for how tall you are. Those are things I look at, and I use the term screen. So I'm screening the patients, and then I look through those, and I say I make this list of the patients I need to see today.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I don't see every patient in the hospital, but the ones I see, then I go and I start looking through the information on the patient, their past medical history, and I make sure their diet that they have is appropriate for them. And then I make sure, after that, I talk to the patient and I teach the patient about what their diet is, and how they can apply that diet into their life. And some patients may already have an understanding of that. We could do a simple review of their diet. It may be a first time that they really realize they need to make changes, and so it requires a little more time to teach them.
Okay.
And so my job is where I sit down and I talk to them about what their diet is, and I talk to them everything about how their appetite is, have you had any changes in your weight, what's going on before you were being in the hospital, and we try to make kind of a plan to go forward.
Okay.
And then I check back with that patient in the future.
Before they leave?
Yeah, we try. We have kind of certain protocols in place where we see a patient, we check back if they're still in the hospital and make sure things are going the way they're supposed to.
Okay, that's good. And so you also, I'm then assuming you're working pretty closely with the physician, right? Because the physician is who's diagnosing and lets you know kind of what the issues are for that patient, so then
Exactly.
you know what it is you're supposed to be looking at. So what kind of choices do you have? I mean, there's lots of different diets that a person can be on, right?
Absolutely, tons of different diets. Everything from, sometimes a patient will need to have their fluids restricted because their body's holding on to too much fluid.
Okay.
That's one restriction. Sometimes the food needs to be altered and changed, and so we make sure the diet is appropriate for that. I don't specialize in their ability to swallow, but I make sure if it's been recommended that they go on to a diet that's like pureed or ground up.
If they're having trouble swallowing, and that lovely, you hear, bland diet.
Yeah, and we have that. We also have diabetic diets for your heart, diets for your kidneys, diets for your liver. There's a variety of diets out there.
Wow.
And what our job is to make sure patients understand why they're on these restrictions. We're not just simply trying to punish them.
Not the food Nazi.
Not the food Nazi, but that there's a reason why, and that it will make them feel better and it will prevent more complications.
So do you also work with them though to kind of help them if they have really strong dislikes or likes, that you kind of help them figure out, like if they're not an oatmeal fan but they have to eat oatmeal, it's part of their diet? Is there a diet where you have to eat oatmeal?
No, I mean, oatmeal, I think oatmeal is great if you like it, but no diet would force you to eat oatmeal. Okay. Everybody has preferences, and we will do our absolute best to accommodate those. And we work with the physicians to let them know. Occasionally a patient will come in and they get in the hospital, and as a dietitian, that's my specialty, is recognizing diets and what their needs are. So I may recognize a patient's maybe not on appropriate diet. So I'll contact the physician and say, would it be okay if we change this diet to one that is more appropriate? And we have a great relationship with all the physicians in the hospital, and that's a great thing that they trust us with. We also work very closely with the nursing staff because they're our eyes a lot of times. They see what's going on with the patients.
Now, I recall, again, this a few years ago when I was a patient in the hospital, and they had to track both my intake and output, as they say. But so, do you keep track, or do the nurses track what you're eating and drinking and then let you know? So
they do.
That's all part of it.
Yeah, we don't do a lot of that hands-on work, unfortunately. We just don't have time.
Sure. Right, so there's only 3 of you, and there's lots of patients.
Yeah, if there's 170 patients and 3 of us, we just can't see it.
Right.
Can't be there 24 hours a day. But they will record the information, and we really use that information to make sure
And that's one of the great things, I think, I'm assuming, now that we've gone more to the electronic medical records, so things are done electronically too, so you don't have to like go up so much on the floor to read a patient's chart, right? You're able to see that more.
We can access it, from my office. I'm lucky enough that I have a little laptop I carry around when I travel throughout the hospital, and then I'm able to pull up information and access that.
That's great. Well, and I hear this all the time from people who've been patients in the hospital about how great the hospital food is, and they're always so surprised because, let's face it, hospital food does not have a real good reputation normally. But I have to say that KRMC's Nutrition Services Department does a pretty awesome job of making food taste good.
Absolutely. We have excellent food, hands down. And I think part of it comes down to we have a system set up where we have staff almost like waiters. We have a system set up where we've now just recently implemented a change where our nutrition staff goes in the room, we take orders. Now, and we now hand deliver the trays ourselves instead of having nurses do it. We do that ourselves, and so we were able to build a relationship with those patients. If a patient doesn't like oatmeal, we know that.
I was going to say, and you bring them oatmeal, but you're going to get that feedback right away when you lift up the cover, right? And they go, ooh.
Absolutely, yeah. And we can't read every patient's mind, but just simply having communication with them, we can get them their needs, and we try our very best to give them, what they want, and it's excellent food that we send them.
So now, are you involved in that kind of, not the actual preparation, obviously, but do you make recommendations on, since you do like to cook, you mentioned that earlier, do you get involved in any of that at all?
A little bit, not as much as some of the other dietitians. One of the dietitians is more or less kind of over the menu and the meals, over what recipes will be prepared and stuff. And as we have ideas, they encourage us to share those ideas.
Sure, well, you all have different kind of background and experience too. So,
but the nice thing is we get ideas from patients, from employees. They submit ideas to us all the time,
well, that's
and
good
often
to
we
know.
implement them.
Okay.
So patients might say, hey, maybe you could try a different approach in cooking something, or
have you ever thought of fixing this?
Have you ever thought about putting this on your menu? And that's where we get our ideas, because we have to know what patients want. And so
True. And everybody's different. That's the other thing. That's always a challenge. And we have a lot of different cultural diversity in our community as well.
Absolutely.
So we have a lot of things you have to take into account. I never really thought about all that till we started talking, and it's more we talk, the more I'm like, wow, that's a much bigger field than just, it's not just food.
Yeah, there's a lot of things you have to juggle all at once.
Right, that's pretty amazing. Now, we talked earlier about food preparation and then helping patients. So do you have like handouts and things you send home with them that helps them with recipes or referrals that where they can go online, or cookbooks they can get? Or
yeah, we do. Like I mentioned before, there's a variety of different diets and different things that they might need. And we provide them with recipes to do that. We teach them how to follow that, and we share resources with them. I had some patients share with me just a free app they found on their phone that helped them with something, and I had never heard of it. So I went and I looked, and then I was able to share that with some other people too. And since it was free, it was a reputable application for their phone. It was nice to have people give me things that I could share with patients too. You learned
something and were able to pass it on. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Now, when you mentioned you got your master's degree after you came to work here. Now, is that, so you've got a Bachelor of Science, is that right? And now what's your master's in?
So my master's is in, it's geared toward dietetics or nutrition, but then it has an emphasis in administration. So it's a business/nutrition degree, and it helps me basically with communication, with organization, the skills to be a successwill dietitian.
Very good. Well, Stephen, thank you for being on the show today. I learned a bunch of new stuff. I always do on my program, and I will have to have you back another time.
Thank you.
I hope you learned something too. Join us again next week when I'll have another great guest on the program.